Hi everyone, it's William. This is the 1906 Diary series. We're up to the 30th of May. Got some great stuff coming up. It is a Tuesday, and so here's a question for you. What do you like to do on a warm Tuesday in summer when you have no obligations at all? So this wasn't quite summer, but the weather was summery. Dimitri didn't have lessons. So there probably aren't many of you who like to play soldiers or work with a lathe specifically, but I'm sure a lot of you out there enjoy fishing. I, for my part, do not. I grew up with relatives from Minnesota and my grandfather, who was an avid fisherman, and they had come out west around the time of the Second World War, a little before, I think, and bought property down by a lake called Vancouver Lake. And there were fish everywhere from my perspective. There were fish in my grandparents' mudroom. There were fish even if my cousins and I went down to play in the long grass that lived that grew around the lake, and some of it was over our heads. And you would sometimes slip on a carp that someone, instead of doing catch and release, had just thrown away, which was unfortunate. So I developed over the years a real aversion to fishing and to fish, so much so that Dimitri gives the names today in the diary entry of two different kinds of fish, and I could have looked them up, but if I had done so, photos of them would have been unavoidable. They would have popped up on my computer screen, and they would have been not the living fish in the water, which could be quite lovely, but dead fish. And my aversion is mostly to fish out of water, as it were. And so when I see pictures like that, and please don't send me any, even as a joke, I lose my appetite. So that's some kind of weird neurotic thing that I picked up from childhood. Dimitri obviously didn't suffer from it. He doesn't talk a lot about fishing throughout his diaries, but apparently when he was at Ilinskaya, that was something that he could do and very much enjoyed doing. He mentions perch, and I always thought of perch as being lake fish. But maybe they're river fish. So I'm not sure if they're fishing in the Moscow River, or if there was a lake or a pond or something on the grounds of Ilinskaya. Anyway, I want to try something a little new. So with each of the diary entries, these in 1906 and 1921, I want to, improve my contextualizing of them. I talk about a lot of more or less irrelevant things like fishing and my own personal thoughts about it. But, I mentioned before, there's a tiny bit of guilt there when I think about making public somebody's diary entries. And it kind of has to be justified, doesn't it? So I like to think of it in terms of what we can learn from it. So the questions that I'm asking myself now as I start each diary entry are, how does this contribute to knowledge of history? How does it contribute to our knowledge of Dimitri himself as a historical figure? And how does it contribute to our knowledge about any other people of note? For instance, he's talking a lot about his Aunt Ella, Grand Duchess Elizabeth, and he talks a lot about Nicholas II when he's together with him, and later in the diaries about various celebrities and noteworthy people, as well as members of his own family. And so all those things are of interest to me and hopefully to you. And of course, I'm also thinking of things in terms of a novelist. Parallel to being a historian, I'm also writing about Dmitri a novel and not the biography, which my friend Ed Hansen is in charge of. He's doing that. So when you see me talking about things, well, like today with the fish, or about Dimitri's mood, or things like that, it's me putting things in a perspective that helps me with the sort of things that are important in a novel. You have to have a character who's relatable. You have to be able, as a novelist, to make your own connections with that character. And, I really even shouldn't use the word character because we're talking about a historical person. And I hope my presentation of him is actually even accurate beyond what a person could do in a biography, which can't be all that interpretive. But anyway, okay, so today's diary entry on those three fronts is not one of the most important one. It's important ones. It's more sort of a placeholder in that context, although all of them are interesting. There are no new people mentioned except for people who it's impossible to identify because they weren't people of note. And we're not really learning anything new about Dmitri, and what we have as far as history goes is just sort of what daily life was like out in the countryside on a country estate. And of course, the fact that we're talking about royal people gives that a twist. So we learn about how the Russian imperial family lived. And to some extent, we learn about how people in general lived on country estates in Russia in the early 20th century. All right, so let's go forward with the diary entry. 30th May, Tuesday, 1906. Heavenly weather today. 15 degrees at 8 o'clock in the morning. Naturally, we lunched on the terrace and ate compote made from real blueberries. At 7:30, we had coffee, and then at 8 o'clock went for a ride in Charabancs. Maria and her carriage drove into a ditch, but she wasn't hurt. From 11 o'clock to 1 o'clock, I worked with the lathe, and after lunch, I played soldiers with Borya until tea time. After that, Mikhail Vasilyevich, Georgy Mikhailovich, and and Sasha went fishing and caught 28 fish collectively. Mashkovsky caught 12. I caught 9, Sasha 4, and GM 3. When we were finished, we had 2 Zherlitsi and 2 Merezhi. I hope so much that I catch something tomorrow. After dinner, we went for a ride. The weather was wonderful. My stupid grief for Peterhof continues. Mikhail Pavlovich is better and actually even well. 9:30. All right, so again, this makes me think of my childhood. I mean, my grandparents' place was not a country estate, but it was the closest I ever came to, and there was a little orchard there, and there were berry bushes, and I remember eating the blueberries and other things straight from the garden, and they did seem more real in that context, but it does surprise me a little bit that Dimitri's talking about compote made from real blueberries. I mean, what would the alternative to that have been? So I think maybe he just means blueberries that were grown right there. All right. So he's getting up early, much earlier, or at least it seems like earlier than what he was doing in Tsarskaya, and having coffee, i.e. breakfast, and at 8 o'clock going for a ride. And so this is adjusting to Aunt Ella's way of doing things, of course. So the word that's used, Maria and her carriage drove into a ditch. Well, the word that's used for carriage is equipage. And equipage can be a carriage, but it can also be a team, like a sports team, or it can be a group of people. Like in the Navy, they had what was called the guards equipage. So this was the guards part of the Navy, of the Imperial Russian Navy. Instead of having a guards regiment, they had the equipage. So the other word that he uses, of course, for carriages, for literal carriages, is char à banc. And in this instance, I don't know if he's using equipage as a general word for a carriage, or if Maria and some people were in this carriage that drove into a ditch. He doesn't tell us if Maria herself was driving the carriage, and he says she wasn't hurt. He doesn't say they weren't hurt. So, yeah, maybe it was a one-person carriage. Maybe she was driving it. I don't know. We're back to playing soldiers with Borya. Oh, I found another one yesterday. Another one. I was so happy to find another one of my toy soldiers, but they're all missing their arms. At least one arm. All of them. So that's disappointing. Okay. So he plays with Borya from... After working on his lathe, he plays with Borya from 1 o'clock to 4 or 5 o'clock. They play soldiers, and I wish I knew, what the specifics of that were. I know Dmitri and Gulia for a while. His brother-in-law were really into tabletop wargaming when they were sharing a house in London, the three of them with Maria. And around that time, there was what I think was the first book to come out that presented a set of rules and instructions for playing soldiers, playing war games. So previous to this, so I'm told, military people certainly did these sort of strategic simulations, but this was, and kids played with toy soldiers, but this was the first time that there was something put into print about, well, if you use these rules and if you use this system, you'll be able to do it in a more systematized way. And believe it or not, that set of rules and that book was produced by no other than H.G. Wells, oddly enough. And he admits that he still likes to play soldiers. He's writing this as, I believe, a middle-aged man, and he admits that he still likes to play soldiers, and that he's ransacked the nursery, the old nursery, to find toy soldiers, and then he comes up with all these elaborate scenarios, and he and his friends play them out. So I don't know if Dmitri and Gulia were using that book in 1920, but the title of that book, if you want to look for it, is Little Wars, and it's a fantastic book. I have an electronic copy, and they're very easy to come by. So the guys are going down to the river or the lake to fish. And I'm sure that women weren't excluded and that Maria could have come, but either they had better things to do or they weren't interested. And so this is a chance for Dmitri to spend some time in masculine company. And he will continue to report on his fishing activities, and you'll see that he was pretty good. He was usually about the second in number in terms of the numbers of fish that were caught by each individual person. And yeah, I guess they caught 28 overall, but he singles out the Gerlitzi and the Mereji, so they must have been some rarer kind of fish. And he's already thinking about tomorrow and hoping to catch some things. And, you know, he seems better. The weather is good. That was always a big deal for Dimitri. When the weather was good, it really improved his mood. It was already 15 degrees in the morning. And, yeah, he's still not quite his lively self, but he's clearly feeling better. But he does inform us that his grief for Peterhof continues. So he's still homesick for Peterhof, not for Peterhof per se, but for the people and the activities that he had there that he doesn't have at Ilinskaya. So he's going to bed at 9:30, and you will note that the days of him writing his diary entries at 10:30 or 10:45 are now long gone. This is not something that Aunt Ella allows. All right, so that's it for today's diary entry, and we'll be starting June, and we've got some very, very interesting things coming up. And unfortunately, we'll also be skipping a lot of days and even weeks. We will skip about half of June, if I remember correctly. So at this point, he's not quite as disciplined as he was before about writing in his diary, and he'll talk about that. So we are rushing forward, and yeah, back next time. See you then. Bye.